I consider myself a pretty rational person. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters, and I certainly don't scare easily. But what happened to me last fall still makes my stomach twist into knots whenever I think about it. It was late October, just before Halloween, and my friend Lucas had invited me to a bonfire at his house. He lives way out in the countryside, where the roads are more dirt than pavement, and cell service is spotty at best. The drive there wasn't too bad, just long stretches of empty road lined with trees that swallowed the sky. I had made the trip plenty of times before, so I didn't think much of it. The party itself was nothing special, just a bunch of us standing around a fire, drinking cheap beer, and telling stories. Around midnight, people started to clear out, and I figured I should do the same. Lucas offered to let me crash on his couch, but I had work in the morning and wanted my own bed. The ride home started normal enough. The moon was bright, and I had my music playing low to keep me from dozing off. But then, about 15 minutes in, I saw something on the side of the road. A figure, just standing there. It was a man, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned suit, the kind with a long coat that draped past his knees. He wasn't moving, wasn't signaling for help, just standing completely still with his head slightly tilted downward. I slowed down as I passed him, expecting him to turn his head or raise a hand. But he didn't. He didn't move at all. A chill crawled up my spine as I checked my rearview mirror. He was gone. Not walking, not running, just gone. I shook it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the trees and shadows had made it look like someone was there. Either way, I kept driving, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. Then, a few miles later, my dashboard lights flickered, my radio cut out, and then, all at once, my car died. No engine, no lights, nothing, just the sound of crickets and the rustling of trees in the wind. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my breath quickening. My phone, of course, had no service. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping. It came from the back window. I barely breathed, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to turn around, but the tapping came again, this time slower, deliberate. I took a deep breath and turned, phone flashlight in hand. The beam of light illuminated the empty road behind me. There was nothing there. And then I heard the sound of footsteps, not just from behind, but from all around the car. Slow, dragging footsteps, moving in a circle. I locked the doors, my fingers shaking. "Hello?" I called out, hating how small my voice sounded. The footsteps stopped, and then, just outside my driver's side window, I heard it, a whisper. "Look at me." I clenched my jaw, staring straight ahead. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look. Then came a scraping sound, nails dragging against the glass, moving toward the back of the car. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Seconds stretched into eternity, and then silence. The air around me felt heavier, thick with something I couldn't explain. I cracked open one eye, then the other. Nothing. Cautiously, I reached for the ignition and turned the key again. The car roared to life. My headlights blinked back on, illuminating the empty road. I didn't think, I just slammed my foot on the gas and sped out of there as fast as I could. By the time I got home, my hands were still shaking. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I dreamed of that voice, that whisper. "Look at me." The next day, Lucas called me. He sounded weird, asking if I had made it home okay. When I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "You saw him." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Saw who?" "The man on the road," he said. "People have seen him for years. He only appears when you're alone, and if you look at him." He trailed off. I swallowed hard. "What happens if you look at him?" Lucas sighed. "No one knows." I haven't taken that road at night since, and I don't plan to. I had just flown back home from a short trip visiting an old friend. My flight was late, and by the time I grabbed my bag and made my way to the taxi section, the airport was practically deserted. I flagged down a cab, a dark-colored sedan, and gave the driver my address. He nodded and quoted me a price much lower than any ride-sharing app. Seemed like a good deal. I got in, setting my bag next to me in the back seat. The driver was a middle-aged man, graying hair, polite but quiet. As we merged onto the highway, I noticed his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, watching me. At first, I brushed it off, but then he started asking questions. Where are you coming from? Visiting a friend? A boyfriend? That one made me pause. I hesitated, then answered, no, just a friend. He chuckled. A girl as pretty as you traveling alone? Dangerous world out there. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I pretended to be busy on my phone, sending my location to my family group chat. He kept glancing back at me, his grip on the wheel tight. The road was empty, no cars in sight. I looked up just in time to realize we were passing my exit. That was my exit, I said, sitting up. He didn't slow down. Oh, was it? Don't worry, I'll take the next one. Panic crept in. No, I need you to take the next exit. He sighed like I was annoying him, but he turned off at the next ramp. The road was eerily quiet, dim streetlights flickering. I texted my brother, something's off, call me. Then the driver asked, do you live alone? Every hair on my body stood up. No, my boyfriend's waiting for me. He was quiet after that. I held my breath as we drove down the empty streets, praying we'd hit a red light near another car, another person, anyone. When we finally reached my street, I told him to stop a block early. I wasn't about to let him know exactly where I lived. I paid quickly and jumped out, walking briskly to a well-lit area. The taxi idled for a moment before driving away. I exhaled, trying to shake the unease. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and peered out the window. The street was empty. But then a knock at the door. Soft. Deliberate. My stomach twisted. I hadn't ordered food. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood frozen as the knocking continued, steady, almost patient. Then silence. Minutes passed. I crept toward the peephole, my heart hammering. No one was there. I backed away, double-checking my locks. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother. Did you get home safe? I started typing back when a new notification popped up. Unknown number. You left your bag in my car. Want me to bring it up? I looked at my bag, sitting right next to me. I never responded. That night, I slept with the lights on, clutching my keys in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. The next day, I installed cameras. I haven't taken a taxi since. When I was a kid, my family moved into a quiet neighborhood in a small town. It wasn't anything special, just an average two-story house with a big backyard and a shed in the corner. My parents loved the house because it had space for my younger sister and me to play. I was 10 at the time, and my sister, Ellie, was 7. We lived there for years without anything strange happening. I spent most of my childhood playing outside, riding my bike around the block, and exploring the small woods behind our house. But something happened when I was 13 that I still can't explain. It started on a chilly autumn night. My parents had grounded me for arguing with a teacher at school, and I was furious. I decided to sleep in the backyard to prove a point. I grabbed a sleeping bag and a pillow and set up camp near the shed. It was quiet outside, the only sounds coming from the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees and the distant hum of cars on the highway. I stayed up for a while, scrolling through a book with a flashlight before eventually dozing off. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up to a noise. A whisper. My name? Ryan? It was soft, barely audible. I sat up and looked around. The backyard was dark, but nothing seemed out of place. I told myself it was just the wind and lay back down. Then I heard it again. Ryan, come here. This time it was clearer, a hushed, urgent whisper. I turned my head toward the shed. The door, which had been shut earlier, was now slightly open. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run inside the house, but I felt frozen. My eyes were locked on that dark opening. And then something moved inside. A shape, a figure, just barely visible in the sliver of moonlight. I could make out the outline of a person standing in the shed, unmoving, watching me. I bolted up, my heart hammering in my chest. Dad? I called, hoping maybe he had come out to check on me. No answer. The figure in the shed shifted slightly, stepping forward. I saw long, bony fingers curl around the edge of the door. I turned and ran toward the house as fast as I could. As soon as I reached the back door, I yanked it open and slammed it shut behind me. My parents were already awake, probably from the noise. My dad came rushing into the kitchen, confused and irritated. "What's going on?" he demanded. I told him everything, breathless and shaking. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside, telling me to stay put. I watched through the window as he walked toward the shed, shining the light inside. After a moment, he turned back and shook his head. "There's nothing here, Ryan," he said when he came back inside. "The door probably just swung open from the wind." But I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I saw. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in my room, listening, waiting. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was waking up to my sister shaking me. "Ryan," she whispered, "someone's outside my window." Her voice was trembling. I sat up immediately, adrenaline surging through me. We shared a wall, and her room faced the backyard, right near the shed. I followed her to her room, and she pointed at the window. The curtains were slightly open, and I could see a figure standing in the yard, just beyond the glow of the porch light. Not moving, just staring. I yanked her away from the window and ran to my parents' room. My dad jumped out of bed and grabbed his phone to call the police. By the time they arrived, whoever had been outside was long gone. They searched the area and found nothing. No footprints. No sign of anyone. After that night, I refused to go outside after dark. My parents had the locks changed and even installed a motion-activated light near the shed. But I always felt uneasy, like I was being watched. Years later, when we were packing to move out, my dad admitted something to me. He had found something in the shed the morning after that night. A pile of old, tattered clothes and a single muddy footprint leading toward the backyard. He never told me before because he didn't want to scare me. I still don't know who or what was out there that night, but sometimes when I think about it, I swear I can still hear that whisper in my head. "Ryan, come here." I was home alone one night, something that didn't happen often. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. I was 16 at the time, spending most of my night playing games in my room. It was quiet, peaceful, just me and the glow of the screen. That peace was interrupted when I heard a knock at the front door. Not the doorbell, just a soft, repetitive knocking. It was unusual, considering it was already past midnight. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I made my way to the door and peered through the peephole. A woman stood there. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with long gray hair and a blank expression. Her clothes were tattered, her hands clasped together. Something about her didn't feel right. I hesitated before speaking. "Who is it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help." I didn't open the door. I wasn't stupid. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and gave a small smile. "I just need to come inside for a moment, please." My stomach twisted. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you in." Her smile didn't fade. "I understand," she said, but she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the door. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I returned to my room, turning off my monitor and sitting in the dark, trying to process what had just happened. Maybe she really needed help. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something inside me screamed that this was wrong. Then the knocking started again. But it wasn't at the door this time. It was at my window. I froze. My bedroom was on the first floor, and my blinds were drawn. I could hear the tapping, soft, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the blinds up just a crack. She was there. Standing just outside, her face illuminated by the pale moonlight. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows, was a man. Tall, with his hood pulled low over his face. He was crouched down as if trying to stay out of sight. My blood ran cold. I dropped the blinds and crawled away from the window, my body shaking. They were trying to get inside. I had no doubt about that now. My mind raced. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself if they broke in. My phone was charging in the kitchen. The only thing I could do was wait. I sat in the darkness for what felt like hours, barely breathing. The tapping continued for a while, then stopped. But I wasn't naive enough to assume they were gone. And then, the doorknob rattled. I bit my tongue to keep from making a sound. I could hear whispering, hushed voices just outside. They were trying to find a way in. I reached under my bed, grabbing the only thing I could find, an old wooden bat I kept from playing baseball years ago. It wasn't much, but it was something. I pressed my back against the wall, my ears straining to hear every sound. Silence. Had they left? Then, a soft voice drifted through the house. "We know you're in there." It came from the back door this time. My stomach churned. They were circling the house, checking every entrance, testing for weaknesses. I stayed put, gripping the bat so tightly my fingers ached. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I lost track of time, sitting in the darkness, waiting, listening. Then, the footsteps faded. The whispering stopped. The silence stretched on, until finally, I built up the courage to move. I crept toward the kitchen, grabbing my phone with trembling fingers. The moment I had it in my grasp, I dialed my dad's number. When he picked up, I whispered everything that had happened. He told me to stay inside, to lock every door and window, and not to move. He was calling the police. When the cops arrived, they searched the property. They found footprints in the mud circling the house. At the back door, they found something even worse. Scratches on the frame, like someone had been trying to force their way in with a knife or some other sharp object. But the worst part? They never found the woman. Or the man. They were just gone. I don't know what they wanted that night. Maybe it was just a robbery. Maybe something worse. But I do know one thing. If I had opened that door, I don't think I would be here to tell this story.